Okay, I would like, before I start, to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm presenting today, and I believe they're Wandian, Jerinja and Yuan people. I would like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and express our gratitude that we share the lands today. Anglicare also expresses our sorrow for the cost of that sharing and our hope that we can move towards a place of justice and partnership together. Okay, an overview of today's session. We'll look at some what I believe to be startling statistics around dementia. Most of the statistics are projections of what's happening in Australia, but dementia is a global syndrome. Before we understand dementia, we've got to look at some really basic structure and function of the brain. And then we'll start unpacking what dementia is and what do we do when we come across people with dementia, and creating a more friendly society, because the statistics will startle you and the projections are quite high, what's coming ahead of us. So some of the statistics. As of 2022, Dementia Australia did a bit of research. There are just probably under 500,000 diagnosed cases. Now, a lot of undiagnosed cases, but just under 500,000 diagnosed cases of dementia. Of those 500,000, there's people with younger onset dementia now that's growing, just under 30,000. And dementia was really first discovered 100 years ago, and they still haven't found a cure. With all the research, all the neuroscientists, all the medical specialists, there is still no cure for dementia. So it's projected by 2058 we will have over 1 million diagnosed cases in Australia. So this is going, and I want you to keep that in mind as we're going through the presentation. It is the second leading cause of death in Australia. The first leading cause is cardiac conditions. The projections on the Sydney corridor anyway, as you can see, by 2050 we're going to basically quadruple our present numbers. The closest neighbours to you here would be the Wollongong area. They're estimating by 2050 we'll have about 2,822. That's based on the current statistics, and that's like 100% increase in what we have today. So, the brain. Okay. This is a very basic diagram of the brain. The brain is probably the most important organ in your body. Nothing goes on without the brain knowing about it or having some kind of regulation or monitoring. So the usual areas we associate with is, behaviour, personality, problem solving, language, reading, memory, emotion, all these things we commonly associate with the brain. but we don't commonly associate vision and hearing. We do associate balance and coordination. Everything you see has to be processed through the brain, because what do we need to do with the brain processing what you see? It's making sense of what you see and processing it, and what are your reactions to what you see and what you hear, making sense of that. So, you know, what you taste, what you touch, even the senses have to be processed through the brain. The other thing that is important about the brain is it also monitors the health of your other organs. It actually gives the heart just the right amount of blood and nutrients. It regulates how much blood is going to the heart, to the lungs. So everything happens in the brain. Okay, I want you to think about an everyday simple task you would have. All right, making a cup of tea. Just look how many steps are involved in that. Okay? So what do you guys think about that? Just even making a simple cup of tea, if you look at the number of steps associated with that, you've got to know where the kettle is. You've got to know where the tap is. You've got to move to pour the water in the kettle. You've got to hear it. Oh, and the brain's got to tell you, oh yeah, the kettle's, boiled. Finding the tea bags, the sugar, even tasting, and smelling, is the milk off? When you do that, these are all the areas that you're using in your brain. And we do it so fast and we don't think about it because the brain has already got that information in us. So you can go ahead and think about, what am I going to have for breakfast today as I'm making a cup of tea, or, I'm going to go and visit my friend or watch the television while you're making a cup of tea. But all these areas, taste, touch, movement, hearing, balance, coordination, memory, smell, and the sequence, the order in which you do that everyday task, your brain is actually working quite fast to compute all that without you even being aware. And it does that because of this little friend here. This is a brain cell, or what we call a neuron in the brain. There are hundreds, billions and trillions of these cells and other supporting cells which have all these intricate connections working across all the different areas of your brain, even to do the most simplest to the most complex task. They like me to do a roadshow here too. The information comes through this, which is a cell body, which processes the information from another cell like it, and it travels down this highway here, which we call an axon, and this connects on to the downstream cell, and so forth. We have connections. I'm going to show you this. This is my favourite part. This is a 3D representation of just the complexity of what's going on in your brain. So if we move across here, it's like a telephone network. If you think of Telstra, anybody work for Telstra? Think of all the wires, think of all the connections. That's how complicated your brain is. And I'll just go into this again because you can actually see things lighting up as we go in there. See? Oh, see things. Oh, okay. Are we going to do this? Okay. Right, no, we're not going to. No, doesn't want to go back. But as we were going in there, we were seeing lights. And the brain is such an efficient organ. There's some of those nerve cells that need to travel from your head down to your foot. So the brain's worked out that to get these connections going through all the way down, and reflexes as well. The brain controls, if you go to step on a nail, you instantly take your foot off it. It works out to get the message through electronically. So there is electricity. All those Frankenstein movies you watched as youngsters, there is electricity in your brain. And the connections communicate, all those lights can connect through electricity. But when they go into the cell, they become chemicals. And a lot of the chemicals, or not the chemicals, but it's protein. The brain is about protein production. All those cells are connected to your DNA and they produce protein. And the protein gets manufactured, and the protein is responsible for certain activities and certain tasks that you do. So if we imagine, after looking at that video, in connection to making a cup of tea, this is the pathway. This is what your brain has to do to make a cup of tea, okay? So as you can see, it's going across like that other picture, lots of different things happening and connecting together. So I want to ask you, what would happen if one of those connections gets damaged, or gets a disease, or packs up in some way? What would happen with that task?
I'd be thirsty.
You'd be thirsty.
Yeah, the whole thing would fall apart.
That's right.
Yeah.
That maybe the whole thing, but maybe not everything. And that's what we've got to keep in mind with dementia. Because dementia is one of those things that could come along and break that chain. As you can see, there's billions and trillions of these connections. So, in terms of making a cup of tea, if only one of those connections were broken, do you think with the millions and trillions of those connections we can find a way around it?
Yeah, definitely.
Probably. Yeah.
That's right. Because as these connections go through, you can find different pathways. So if one, see all these pathways? This is a bit too early. My boss changed this a bit on me today. Okay, so there's lots of different connections, yes. So this is a healthy brain with lots of connections. This is a diagram. Lots of connections, lots of different cells. When the neurons are damaged, when those connections are damaged, this is what we start to see in the brain. You can see that these connections stop connecting, so the brain might stop connecting. Like you need everything in the brain to work to do a particular task. So some of those tasks, and as the dementia progresses, more and more of those connections are compromised. But if you catch dementia at the earliest stages, you can work around those connections. And it might work for a while, and then with the progress of the dementia, it won't work after a while. So, what is dementia? What do you guys commonly associate with dementia when you hear the word dementia or when you come across someone with dementia? Any volunteers?
Forgetfulness.
Forgetfulness? Yeah. Yeah.
Not knowing where you are.
Disorientation, not knowing where you are.
Not understanding, I suppose, what things are, what they do, all that.
Yeah. You know, in making a cup of tea, I could look at a cup, right? And I may cease to recognise what a cup looks like. Very, very common symptoms. All of what you brought up now are common symptoms of dementia, but there are so much more. Dementia isn't a standalone disease or illness. And as all of you, or the people that have contributed have said, it's a collection of symptoms. It's things that you notice about people. And it's caused by disorders, neurological disorders that are affecting the brain. Dementia itself is not just something you can pick up and then now you can tell why it's still 100 years later we haven't got a cure for it. It isn't just something you can pick up with, you know, an identified set of symptoms. It can be caused by so many things going on in your brain. And a lot of us have things that are going on in our brain, but we're still able to, you know, get up each morning, do the tasks that we do, forget about, you know, we don't even know that there are things going on in our brain, that connections are breaking down. And as you get older, connections do break down. It's not necessarily an older person's disease, because there are many older people that have died and have not had dementia either. So it is basically something to be diagnosed with dementia. It has to interfere with your daily living. You have to have something that you've identified that you can't do anymore, or that you're finding difficulty or struggling in doing it. But what dementia is, there are many different forms of dementia. There's well over, I think we've got about 160 forms of dementia. Hi, is this Chris?
Yes.
Welcome, Chris. We were waiting for you.
Oh, thank you.
There is so many different forms of dementia. About 160 and more are getting diagnosed each day. But essentially what it is, it's that disorientation, it's that forgetfulness, it's that, you know, looking at something and not making sense of it. It's essentially the same. All these symptoms are common to all the dementias. They're probably just hallmarks between the different types of dementia. But dementia, for a different, like a particular form of dementia to happen in your brain, there's something specific, a specific pathology that's going on in your brain. And it might be connected to the trillions and millions of connections, and also the type of protein that has been mutated in the brain. So essentially what it is, it's a collection of symptoms. It's an umbrella term that we use. The four common categories that we usually hear about are Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy bodies, and frontotemporal dementia. Each of these have different hallmarks in terms of symptomology, but each of these overlap each other with symptoms as well. So there goes the complexity. Alzheimer's is probably the most common form of dementia. About 2/3 of diagnosis is Alzheimer's disease. And that's basically affected by clumps of protein, a protein called amyloid that breaks down the connections between the cells, but also there are growths within the cell as well. Vascular dementia is usually caused by burst blood vessels in the brain as a result of multiple little strokes or, a big stroke that can take out half your brain. Lewy bodies is another kind of dementia. It's usually associated with Parkinson's disease, and a lot of Parkinson's disease and Lewy body crossover. And frontotemporal dementia, that's particularly sad because most of the people who get frontotemporal dementia are people usually with motor neuron disease, and usually it affects people that are younger as well. People in their 40s, 50s, even 30s get frontotemporal dementia. So, what are some of the symptoms of dementia? We've had disorientation, we've had, not recognising where things are. What are some of the other things that you know about in terms of symptoms?
Clearly recalling things from the past, but not things recent.
Yeah, your short-term memory, you're unable to learn new things or absorb information, but you can happily remember what happened in your childhood, even though you might be 80, 90 years old. So your long-term memory stays intact, but not with all forms of dementia. There's some forms of dementia where you do lose your long-term memory as well. So these are some of the symptoms of dementia. They're the early symptoms as well, things that you might start, noticing about yourself or someone in your family or a friend. Reduced concentration, personality and behavioural changes. When we looked at the diagram of the brain, the front part of your brain is responsible for laying down your personality and your behaviour, and I found that fascinating because I actually thought personality was shaped by your environment and your reactions, but there is a part in your brain that is responsible for your personality. So with things like frontotemporal dementia, your personality changes. You might have been a lovely person, a caring person, and all of a sudden you're just a selfish person, an impatient person. Language is also affected by frontotemporal dementia. You can start swearing as you lose your vocabulary. Your vocabulary, people start swearing and doing inappropriate things. Apathy and withdrawal is something that I've seen for pretty much 30 years of my experience. A lot of people with dementia have depression. Some people with dementia will have had depression before they had dementia, but sometimes with dementia there is depression as well. So people lose their confidence and they lose their interest in doing things. And families struggle at home because sometimes all the person wants to do is sit and watch television. And I don't know about you, but if I sat there at home every day and watched television, and it works against the person as well, because when you start withdrawing from all your activities and not doing anything, your brain slows down even further. So the trajectory of deterioration becomes faster because you're not using it. And these are other things, disorientation we have there, poor and decreased judgment, problems with spatial skills. That's why people sometimes make the decision to give up driving, because it's not safe for them to be on the road anymore. And that's a very hard thing for some people, because that, without driving, that's loss of independence and relying on other people. So here we have specimens of the brain. They're people who died and who donated their brain for research, and that's part of the reason why we haven't found a cure, and not really understanding the conditions very well, because not many people who die donate their brain to us. And most of the studies over the years have been done on mice and animals, which are all fine, but mice are not human people. But there are other techniques now. We could do brain scans, we can do biomarkers, staining of different cells in your brain to look at what is happening to the cells in the brain. So over here, I'm sorry, am I blocking you? Over here, we've got a specimen of someone who died that had a healthy brain, okay? And over to the right here, we have someone who died who had Alzheimer's disease. Can you notice the difference?
Yes.
Who can tell me what they see?
Well, it looks like their memory and language is affected.
That's right, there's a great big hole where that used to be, right? Because that's the cells dying, losing those connections and shriveling up and dying. But also, if you notice the size of the brain, as the organ has deteriorated, the brain has shrunk. It's stopped. So out of the 160 types or forms of dementia that we know of so far, they all have one thing in common, okay? They're progressive, so your symptoms will get worse over time. That's something that you can't stop, but there are things that you could do to slow it down, and I'll talk about that later. It's terminal as well, because as we saw, the body is the brain is connected to other organs in your body and regulates the function of those organs. So as it breaks down, those organs start to malfunction as well. And yes, we know there's no cure. So if you notice something like one of those early symptoms, don't hold off. Don't ignore it. Don't just put it down to, if you notice it and it's coming up a lot, go to your GP. And there's lots of things that they can do for you. First of all, they'll give you a medical history to rule out any other conditions that might be going on in your body, or any other medical history that might explain what's happening to your brain. Physical examination, they'll give you, they'll test your heart and your lung and all these things to make sure that they're functioning well. Laboratory or pathology tests, their blood tests, urine tests, things like that, to rule out any infections. because some infections that you have can be mistaken for dementia. You can have infections, you can have side effects if you're on a particular medication. A lot of the things that come out are, you can have chronic depression. Chronic depression, some of the symptoms mimic dementia symptoms. All those things are treatable. You can even have vitamin deficiency, and those things are treatable. So it might not be dementia, but it's worth checking out. They can even do brain imaging, neurocognitive testing, like they'll give you a set of questions to test your memory, to test your judgment, to test your problem solving. Imaging of the brain will tell them what's going on in your brain to see if there's any disconnections or anything they're identifying in the brain. And of course, like I said, the psychiatric assessment if you are having mental health issues. And those mental health issues are usually more treatable than dementia. And a lot of them aren't terminal. So, and with a lot of those things, they can mimic dementia. So go and get checked out. Early diagnosis is important because, like I said, you can treat reversible conditions. You can, if you do get a diagnosis of dementia, don't you want to understand what it is, what's going on, how you can live your best life with it? This is really important. Don't feed into what, the stereotypes and society and all this thing. People are embarrassed to say they have dementia or know of someone who has dementia. A lot of people that we come across in our service say, we used to go out, we used to have friends, but one by one they dropped off. That's really, really sad. Really sad. There are younger people with the onset of dementia. They might be in the prime of their life. They might have careers, they might be working, they might be raising a family, they might be looking after elderly parents themselves. And yet everybody starts withdrawing from them. Some employers we've worked with have been very understanding. Others have said, no, you're out. It's a dreadful, it's not something we want to be doing as a society. It's something we want to enable people to live independently and their best life, with or without dementia. You might also find out possible strategies to reduce the rate of decline, things like lifestyle modifications, healthy diet, a bit of circulation, a bit of exercise is important. And access to support and services like ourselves. And you might also want to plan for the future. As your dementia progresses, what kind of medical treatment do you want? As your heart and lungs begin to dysfunction, do you want to be aggressively treated for that, or do you not? And families and doctors aren't always in the best position to decide. So if you get it early on in the piece, you can control what you want to happen as you lose control. So what do we do about dementia? If we come across someone with dementia, a friend, we've started to notice some things a little bit, not right about them, what do we do? Do we dismiss them if they forget to make some steps in making a cup of tea, right? Do we just jump in and do it for them? Well, what is your opinion of that? What do we do if we come across someone that might have those symptoms?
Ask some questions.
Sorry?
Ask some questions.
ask some
you know,
questions.
Like, what are you doing there? And let them, if they can't explain, then that might, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So try and find out what they want to do, because people that might have a symptom of dementia might be trying to look for directions in the supermarket. Okay, they might be wanting to find out where the chicken section is, but they might come out and say something completely different. So stopping, being patient with them, trying to find out exactly what they want. And patience is, and we don't have much patience in our society, do we? People have to know what they're doing and go and do it. This is very, very hard. I've got some information there in the back about dementia, but if you go onto the Dementia Australia website, there are so many stories and testimonies of people with the lived experience and carers of people and supporting people with lived conditions. There's so many different stories, and it's embarrassing. It's also very distressing. The greatest fear is losing your mind. Not knowing where you are, not knowing what you're doing. You've caught a bus somewhere but you don't know where you're going. That could be frightening.
I would have thought too that you wouldn't want to challenge too much. Like, you wouldn't want to say, if somebody sort of was mistaking you for somebody else, and clearly they're confused, you would just gently go through it.
That's right. That's right. Very, very good point. Because sometimes the person could be imagining that you're their mother or their father, and you're clearly not their mother or father, but you know, it's their reality. And it's not like you can stop and argue or dismiss them or speak negatively to them, because that impacts their confidence. Live with them in that moment. Sometimes I would say, if they're having that moment and you can see they're lost in time, but it's really, really distressing them, the other thing is to distract them with something else, shift their focus onto something else. But otherwise, don't challenge their reality. Okay, so we showed the diagram again with connections, a broken connection that comes along. Okay, just say that person is in the early stages of their dementia, okay, and is that very simple example I showed you earlier, which is making a cup of tea, okay. They might go in the kitchen, and you know, what are some of the things that they might forget? They might remember some parts of it, they may not remember other parts of making a cup of tea. What are some of the things they might forget?
Filling the kettle.
Filling the kettle, that's right. Where the tea bags are.
Some of these things could work out to be dangerous, couldn't they? Not filling the kettle and turning it on. You wouldn't know where that could lead.
That's right. And as people progress in their symptoms, that's why we've got to encourage, work alongside people. They might not be able to remember everything, but with all our billions and millions of connections, like the telephone wiring system, we can rewire. So if they're in the early part of their dementia, they walked into their kitchen, they're doing a simple task, e.g. making a cup of tea, they might have just forgotten where the tea bags are. Or because everybody's cupboards, you can't see through them when you walk in the kitchen, they might know they want a cup of tea, but they might not know where everything is. So we can rewire that task for them by putting everything out for them. Putting the tea, putting the coffee, putting the sugar, putting a sign on the fridge saying this is where the milk is, putting something around the kettle, a photo, if they've forgotten, if they've ceased to recognise words. So we could put pictures. So with some memory prompts, we can still continue doing the things that we used to love and enjoy. But it needs monitoring. People, that are working with you, that are supporting you, need to know if you progress. And then we need to find something. And we'll keep on, this is something we do in our service, we'll keep on finding things around the broken and damaged pathways until we exhaust it, until we know that you are in your final stages. So one thing, this is Western Sydney Dementia Alliance. Because we haven't found a cure for dementia, and because from what you saw in the projections earlier on in the piece, the numbers are growing, quadrupling, the projections. We are now, there's a global shift, organisations like us all over the world, all over Australia, are moving to what we're doing today. We're doing community education, and we're doing a series on dementia. This is just the basics of what dementia actually is. But there are groups called Dementia Alliance, which are registered with Dementia Australia, and their roots, community roots, action groups that educate themselves on dementia and make their communities friendly to increasing numbers of people who are going to get dementia. So these committees usually comprise of 3 different types of people. The families that are supporting the people with dementia, people in dementia that are there at early stages, that can stand up and say, look, this is how I want to be treated. This is my experience living with this condition. This is what I would like to see. When I go into a coffee shop and I forget what I like to order, I'd like the barista to be a bit more kinder to me, to be a bit more patient with me. And they educate businesses and employers and schools. Because what we need to do is build a society that is inclusive. Everybody deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. Medical professionals are one of the biggest culprits in this. We need to educate our medical professionals. There are people who have sat there, got diagnosis from their geriatrician. He hasn't even looked them in the eye. He's told them, go home, clean up your affairs, this is the end of it. And they might be in the early stages of dementia. Why would you say that to someone? So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to move globally to say, hey, this is what it is, educate the community better about it, and then we've worked out ways to accommodate people with disabilities. There's a big disability rights movement, okay? So we worked out a way to include people with mental health and disability in our society. So we can do that with people who are living with dementia as well. And this is basically what we do in our service. Lots of services like ourselves. We would like to start something in this area. We've got things that are happening down more Wollongong and Port Kembla way. But we would like to start, connection cafes. People who have dementia and the people who are caring for them, as I said, become socially isolated. Let's get them together. Let's get them with like-minded people that can share and give, the best tips and strategies for managing some of the symptoms are those who have actually lived with it and really, really understand, right? And we've got workshops, and we've got support groups, so we can meet with, you know, wives, husbands, sons, daughters, help them navigate the complex structures of my aged care, help them, how do I respond to this behaviour? How do I continue being my best in supporting this person without losing myself, you know, without being worn down? And the same with people with the lived experience. Sometimes they don't want to burden the people that are caring for them, so they internalise a lot of things. And it isn't, there's a saying, it isn't, you know, the journey itself that you're on when you get dementia. It's what happens on that journey that greatly impacts your life. And of course we do community education. So to summarise, this is the brain. It is a complex structure. It's got a lot going on for it. It regulates your entire body, including your higher level functions like memory and language. Dementia is a collection of symptoms. It's not a standalone condition or disorder. It's caused by a number of conditions that might be going on in your body. Parkinson's, motor neuron disease, Huntington's disease. Alzheimer's disease is not dementia. It's a disease, and one of its symptoms is dementia. And it interferes with your daily life. We know it's progressive and we know it's terminal. But where there are pathways that can be connected, this is what's going to maintain your independence. A lot of people's confidence is sapped from how other people treat them. You know, if you're an adult and you're being treated like a baby, if being told what to do, if someone's just going in there and making that cup of tea for you and not allowing you, it might take you, you know, an hour to make that cup of tea. But at least you've done it, not someone else. And, you know, your doctor will do a very comprehensive assessment to rule out a number of conditions that you can treat that mightn't be dementia. But if it is, you can catch it in the early stages and make a lot of preparations, learn a lot about it, and those around you as well can better support you. And that's it, folks.